At 18, my parents believed my sister used lie and kicked me out in a storm. Get out. I do not need a sick daughter. 3 hours later, police called them to the hospital. When my father walked in and saw who was sitting by my bed, his hands would not stop shaking. You cannot be here. My name is Paige. I am 33 years old, and I am a senior forensic accountant. I hunt down corporate fraud for a living. I follow the money and I ruin the lives of corrupt executives. But my very first investigation, the one that taught me how truly dark people can be, started in my own home. Before I tell you how I survived a historic Chicago blizzard and completely destroyed my family, U.S. wealthy facade, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever been the family scapegoat who came back to win it all. The nightmare began inside the claustrophobic metal box of an ambulance. Red and blue emergency lights flashed erratically against the thick, falling snow of a brutal Chicago winter. I was 18 years old and my body was shutting down. I am a type 1 diabetic, and I was in the middle of a severe hypoglycemic episode. My blood sugar was crashing so hard that my vision was tunneling into darkness. My hands trembled violently, and a thick, disorienting fog wrapped around my brain. I could taste the sharp, metallic flavor of blood in my mouth from where I had bitten my tongue during the impact. Sitting on the rear bumper of the ambulance, wrapped snugly in an orange thermal blanket, was my 16-year-old sister, Sydney. She smelled strongly of cheap vodka stale perfume and whatever designer pills she had swallowed at the country club party she had sneaked into earlier that night. Sydney was the golden child. She was the beautiful, popular, untouchable daughter who could do no wrong in the eyes of our parents. And she had just totaled our father us brand new Mercedes-Benz by slamming it headfirst into a concrete highway divider while high out of her mind. I remember the terrifying seconds before the crash. I had been in the passenger seat, dizzy and weak, begging Sydney to pull over so I could check my blood sugar. She just laughed, turned up the music, and hit the gas pedal harder. When the car slammed into the concrete, the airbags deployed with a deafening crack. While I was slipping into unconsciousness from the physical trauma and the plummeting glucose levels, Sydney acted with pure, calculated malice. She unbuckled my seatbelt, grabbed me by the shoulders of my winter coat, and dragged my dead weight over the center console. She shoved me behind the steering wheel, wiping her own blood on my jacket to ensure the police would think I was the one driving. The police officer stood over me in the ambulance, shining a bright tactical flashlight directly into my dilated pupils. He assumed my slurred speech and lack of coordination were signs of extreme intoxication. I tried to beg for glucose. I tried to tell him I was diabetic and needed sugar immediately to avoid slipping into a coma. But my tongue felt heavy and useless. Because my father Harrison was a highly influential and wealthy chief financial officer in the city, the police officer decided to do him a personal favor. Instead of rushing me to the hospital for the critical medical intervention I desperately needed, they drove us straight to our massive gated estate in the northern suburbs to handle the incident quietly and protect the family name. The heavy oak front doors of our mansion swung open, letting the freezing winter air rush into the grand marble foyer. Harrison stood there in his expensive silk pajamas. He did not rush forward to ask if his daughters were hurt. He did not check to see if we had broken bones or internal bleeding. He marched straight past the police officer, his face twisted in absolute rage. He grabbed me by the collar of my torn jacket, hauled me to my feet, and slapped me across the face with so much force that the room spun. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the freezing marble floor. My head cracked against the stone, sending stars shooting across my vision. He stood over my shivering body, screaming at the top of his lungs about how I had ruined his luxury car. I lay there on the ground, my body convulsing from the insulin shock, while my own father raged solely about the paint job on his vehicle. Right on cue, Sydney began her performance. She burst into loud theatrical sobs, burying her face in her hands and shaking her shoulders to make it look authentic. She threw herself into the arms of our mother Barbara, who had just rushed down the sweeping staircase wearing her pristine designer nightgown. Barbara wrapped her arms around Sydney, stroking her hair and glaring at me with a look of pure disgust. Sydney pointed a shaking manicured finger at me as I struggled to push myself up on my weak elbows. She told them I was jealous of her perfect life. She lied through her teeth, claiming that I had suffered a mental breakdown in the car, grabbed the steering wheel, and tried to kill us both in a murder-suicide attempt. She told our parents that my blood sugar drop had made me psychotic and violent. I tried to shake my head. I whispered that she was lying, that she was high on drugs and driving recklessly. I begged them to look at my medical alert bracelet. But Barbara stepped forward and kicked my trembling hand away from her expensive slippers. She looked down at me as if I were a piece of trash that had blown in from the street. She told the police officer that I had always been a sick, twisted burden. She announced to the entire room that my type 1 diabetes was a massive financial drain and a constant embarrassment to their flawless country club image. She said I was always seeking attention through my illness, and that this was just another pathetic attempt to ruin the family reputation. Harrison stormed over to his mahogany entryway desk. He grabbed a thick stack of medical bills and insurance papers, turned around, and threw them violently right into my face. The sharp edges of the thick paper cut my cheek as they fluttered down to the marble floor. He yelled that my medical supplies cost him thousands of dollars every single month. He called me a defective investment. Those were his exact words, a defective investment. He screamed, asking why he should keep paying exorbitant medical fees to keep me alive when I was actively trying to murder his perfect, healthy golden child. I was desperately fighting to stay conscious. The darkness was pulling at the edges of my vision. My fingers clawed weakly at the marble floor, searching frantically for my medical bag. I knew I had emergency glucose tablets in there. I just needed one, just one single tablet to stop my brain from shutting down. But Sydney had subtly kicked the bag behind her legs. She stood there safely wrapped in our Mother Earth's arms, watching me slowly shut down. Through her fake dramatic tears, I could see a tiny cruel smirk playing on her lips. She was thoroughly enjoying watching me suffer for her crimes. Suddenly, the sharp ringing of Harrison U.S. cell phone pierced through the yelling. It was his corporate security team calling on the emergency line. Harrison answered, and within seconds the color completely drained from his face. He dropped the phone, ran to his leather briefcase, resting on the console table, and ripped it open. He began tearing wildly through the neatly organized files, throwing papers everywhere. He started screaming that a highly confidential silver flash drive was missing. It was a drive containing top-secret, unedited corporate financial ledgers that proved massive embezzlement at his firm. I looked up through my hazy vision and saw Sydney completely freeze. Her breathing stopped. I knew exactly what she had done. Sydney had massive hidden drug debts from her underground party lifestyle. She constantly stole things from around the house to pawn or sell to her shady connections. She must have stolen the flash drive planning to sell corporate secrets, or use it as blackmail to pay off her dealers. In the chaotic frenzy, while Harrison was turning the entire foyer upside down and screaming at Barbara to help him search, Sydney crouched down next to me on the floor. She pretended to check on my injuries for the benefit of the police officer who was busy filling out a report by the door. Under the physical cover of her body, she quickly unzipped my medical bag. The bag that held my life-saving insulin vials, my test strips, and my glucose tablets. With lightning speed, she slipped the stolen silver flash drive deep inside the bag, pushing it under the medical supplies, and zipped it back up. I tried to scream. I tried to command my vocal cords to tell Harrison to search Sydney's pockets. I tried to point at her, but my body was completely paralyzed by the severe hypoglycemia. I could only watch in mute horror as she framed me. Sydney stood up, wiped a fake tear from her eye, and casually suggested that maybe I had stolen the drive because I wanted to ruin the family financially before trying to crash the car. Harrison stopped dead in his tracks. He turned slowly and walked over to me like a predator stalking wounded prey. He snatched my medical bag from the floor, right next to my limp hand. He yanked the zipper open and aggressively dumped the entire contents onto the hard marble floor. Syringes, alcohol wipes, testing meters, fragile vials of insulin, and the heavy silver flash drive all scattered loudly across the stone tiles. Harrison completely lost his mind. He snatched the drive from the floor and clutched it in his fist. He looked down at me with a hatred so deep and pure that it burned. I managed to gasp out a single raspy breath, trying to say that Sydney had just put it there. But Barbara immediately started screaming that I was a lying, manipulative thief. She said I was trying to destroy the only man who was generous enough to pay for my pathetic medical existence. Harrison did not just yell. He took a deliberate, heavy step forward and brought his leather slipper down directly onto my insulin vials. I heard the sickening crunch of the fragile glass shattering under his weight. He stomped again and again, crushing every single vial I had. The precious life-saving liquid medication that I needed to survive the night began soaking uselessly into the expensive Persian rug. Then he grabbed me roughly by the back of my neck and the collar of my torn coat. He hauled me to my feet, ignoring my groans of pain, and dragged my dead weight toward the massive oak front doors. The blizzard outside was howling furiously. The weather alert had warned of a historic Chicago freeze, with wind chills plunging to 20 degrees below zero. I was wearing nothing but a thin ripped jacket, a light shirt, and denim jeans. He threw the heavy doors open. The violent freezing wind whipped violently into the warm house, stinging my skin like tiny needles. He forcefully shoved me out the door. I tumbled down the icy stone front steps and crashed hard into the deep snowdrifts piling up in the driveway. The cold was instantly paralyzing. It hit my chest so hard I could barely draw a breath. Harrison stood in the warm, brightly lit doorway, looking down at my shivering, broken body sinking into the snow. His face showed absolutely zero remorse. He pointed a finger at me and yelled over the roaring wind, "Get out! I do not need a sick, thieving daughter." Then he stepped back and the heavy oak doors slammed shut. I heard the metallic click of the deadbolt locking into place. The porch lights immediately flicked off, plunging me into complete darkness. I was entirely alone, trapped in a historic lethal blizzard with my blood sugar rapidly dropping to a fatal level, and my own family had just sealed my death warrant to protect a liar. The wind howling off Lake Michigan felt like shattered glass against my exposed skin. My ripped jacket offered zero protection against the -20-degree wind chill whipping through the elite Chicago suburb. Every single step I took through the knee-deep snow was an agonizing battle between my rapidly fading consciousness and a primal, desperate instinct to survive. I was an 18-year-old type 1 diabetic, and I was actively dying in the dark. My blood sugar had dropped to a critical, fatal level. My brain was completely starving for glucose. I could no longer feel my fingers, and the severe hypoglycemia made my legs shake with violent, uncontrollable tremors. My heart hammered frantically against my ribs, sounding like a trapped bird trying to break free from a cage of ice. I stumbled blindly down the long, sweeping driveway of my father's U.S.-gated estate, moving further away from the locked oak doors and the warmth I had just been brutally denied. I knew exactly what was happening to my physical body. Without immediate medical intervention, my major organs would begin to shut down. First would come the severe confusion, followed by the seizures, and finally a permanent diabetic coma. Harrison knew this reality too. He knew perfectly well that kicking me out into a historic, lethal blizzard without my insulin or emergency glucose tablets was an absolute death sentence. He had effectively decided to murder his own child to protect his reputation and cover up for his golden child. The betrayal burned much hotter than the freezing air, but even that intense anger was not enough to fuel my failing muscles. I dragged my heavy boots through the thick snow, somehow making it past the towering wrought iron security gates of the property. The affluent suburban street was completely deserted. Not a single car, not a single neighbor was foolish enough to brave the deadly storm. The tall streetlights flickered ominously above, casting long, eerie shadows across the barren white landscape. My vision began narrowing into a dark, suffocating tunnel. The violent shivering that had racked my body suddenly stopped. I knew this was the most dangerous physiological sign of all. My core body temperature was dropping far too fast, and my system was giving up the fight. My knees finally gave out. I collapsed forward, falling face first into a massive snowdrift on the side of the icy road. The snow felt deceptively soft, almost welcoming against my battered face. The biting, agonizing pain in my extremities began to fade into a strange, terrifying numbness. I tried to push myself up with my bare hands. I tried to command my body to crawl, to scream out for help into the void of the storm, but my muscles refused every single command. I laid my freezing cheek against the icy ground, watching helplessly as the heavy snowfall rapidly covered my torn jacket. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness completely overtake me. I surrendered my breath to the howling wind and prepared myself for the absolute end. Then a blinding beam of golden light sliced violently through the raging whiteout. The deafening, aggressive roar of a massive engine broke through the howling wind. Heavy snow-rated tires locked and screeched loudly against the black ice, sending a massive wave of gray slush washing over the curb. The vehicle was a custom-built, heavily armored black SUV, the exact kind of tactical transport usually reserved for moving heads of state or high-value targets through hostile territories. It slammed to a halt just inches from where my broken body lay sinking into the snowbank. The heavy bulletproof passenger door swung open with a solid metallic thud. Heavy footsteps crunched purposefully and rapidly through the deep snow, moving directly toward me. I forced my heavy eyelids open just a fraction, fighting against the heavy curtain of unconsciousness. A tall, intensely imposing figure stepped into the bright halo of the headlights. He wore a tailored wool overcoat that screamed quiet luxury, immense wealth, and absolute authority. This was not a random Good Samaritan wandering the streets. This was Warren. He was the ruthless billionaire hedge fund manager from New York. He was the founder and chairman of the very same massive financial empire where my father served as a chief financial officer. Warren was a legend in the corporate world, a man who moved billions of dollars with a single phone call and destroyed corrupt, greedy executives for sport. What I did not know then, as I lay dying at his expensive leather shoes, was that Warren had secretly flown into Chicago under the strict cover of the blizzard. He was not there for a social visit or a routine corporate review. He was there to personally lead a covert high-stakes investigation into a massive embezzlement ring operating right out of Harrison, U.S. regional office. Warren was hunting a thief, and the trail of missing millions had led him directly to my father's U.S. gated estate in the middle of the freezing night. Warren knelt right down in the freezing, dirty slush, completely ignoring the absolute ruin of his expensive tailored suit. He did not waste time asking useless questions. He took one sharp look at my pale blue-tinged face, spotted the medical alert bracelet glinting weakly on my freezing wrist, and recognized the severe, life-threatening tremors racking my body. He immediately recognized me from the mandatory corporate family galas. He knew I was the quiet, consistently ignored daughter of his prime suspect. Without a single second of hesitation, Warren slid his strong arms under my freezing body and lifted me effortlessly from the icy snowbank. I felt the intense, radiating warmth of the armored vehicle as he carried me swiftly toward the open door. He issued a sharp, commanding order to his private security detail in the front seats, instructing the driver to immediately abandon the surveillance mission and route the vehicle directly to the nearest emergency trauma center. He placed me carefully onto the heated leather seats. The heavy armored door slammed shut behind us, sealing us safely inside the heated, secure cabin. The massive SUV tore away from the icy curb, leaving my father's estate and the freezing death trap entirely behind in the storm. The armored SUV violently lurched to a halt at the emergency bay of Chicago Memorial Hospital. The heavy doors flew open. Medical personnel swarmed the vehicle and shouted rapid-fire orders over the deafening roar of the blizzard. I was a lifeless and freezing weight on the stretcher. Fluorescent hospital lights strobed painfully across my closed eyelids as they sprinted down the sterile white corridors. My core temperature had plummeted to a critical level. My blood sugar was practically non-existent. The trauma team did not have time to gently undress me. A nurse grabbed heavy trauma shears and sliced directly through the thick frozen fabric of my torn winter jacket. They had to expose my veins immediately to push high-dose intravenous glucose and warm saline into my failing circulatory system. As the ruined fabric fell away from my shivering body, a heavy metallic object slipped from the shredded inner lining It hit the polished linoleum floor with a sharp and distinct clatter that echoed through the chaotic trauma bay. Warren stood perfectly still in the corner of the chaotic room. His expensive wool overcoat was ruined with melting snow and my blood. His posture remained absolutely rigid and commanding. His sharp and predatory eyes instantly locked onto the object on the floor. It was a heavy, silver encrypted flash drive. It was not a standard consumer device. It was a military-grade biometric USB drive specifically issued to elite corporate executives handling multi-billion-dollar accounts at his hedge fund. Warren stepped forward and ignored the frantic medical staff rushing around my bed. He bent down and picked up the cold metal drive. His thumb traced the engraved serial number on the casing. He knew exactly what he was holding. This was the master ledger. This was the exact digital vault containing the raw and unedited financial data he had secretly flown to Chicago to find. The drive held the undeniable proof of the $5 million Harrison had systematically embezzled from the corporate accounts. Warren stared at my unconscious and broken body. The very evidence he needed to destroy my father had just fallen out of my frozen and discarded jacket. Hours passed in a blur of medical machines and vital monitors. The aggressive intravenous glucose slowly coaxed my brain back from the brink of a permanent coma. I opened my eyes to the harsh and sterile light of the private recovery suite. The violent tremors had stopped and were replaced by a deep and hollow exhaustion. I turned my head heavily against the stiff hospital pillow. Warren was sitting in a leather visitor chair right next to my bed. He was not looking at his phone. He was not pacing. He was staring directly at me with a terrifying and calculated intensity. The silver flash drive rested on the movable tray table right next to my water pitcher. He saw my eyes focus on the metal object. He leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. The absolute power and authority radiating from him was suffocating. He asked me a single and direct question. He demanded to know exactly why the daughter of his chief financial officer was freezing to death in a blizzard with a stolen corporate ledger in her pocket. I did not cry. I did not beg for his pity. The betrayal I had just suffered at the hands of my own family had burned away any remaining childhood innocence. I looked the billionaire straight in the eyes and told him the exact and unvarnished truth. I told him how my sister Sydney drove high on drugs and destroyed the car. I explained how Harrison slapped me to the floor and stomped on my life-saving insulin vials. And then I told him about the flash drive. I explained that Sydney had massive and hidden drug debts. I detailed exactly how she had used the chaos of the police presence to slip the stolen drive deep into my medical bag to frame me. Warren listened in complete silence. He watched my face for any sign of deception, then he tested me. He asked why Sydney would steal a highly encrypted corporate drive that she could not even unlock. That is when my brain, fueled by the fresh glucose and cold pure rage, kicked into absolute high gear. I did not just answer his question. I dismantled the entire financial security protocol of my father. I told Warren that Sydney did not need to unlock it. She only needed to sell the physical drive to the direct competitors of Harrison. I explained that I had spent years watching Harrison work in his home office. I knew his habits. I told Warren that Harrison was arrogant but paranoid. He kept the ghost ledger on that specific silver drive because it was air-gapped and completely disconnected from the main corporate network to avoid digital audits. I did not stop there. I pointed out that the $5 million missing from the quarterly reports was not hidden in complex offshore accounts. I told Warren to look at the vendor invoices for the new Chicago development project. I explained that Harrison was using shell companies registered under the name of Sydney to authorize massive overpayments for construction materials that were never delivered. I detailed how the money was washed through fake consulting fees and funneled right back into his private wealth management accounts. I explained the exact psychological flaw in his embezzlement method and how his massive ego made him use repetitive numbering sequences to hide the stolen funds. Warren sat back in his chair and looked visibly stunned. I was an 18-year-old girl who had just survived a lethal diabetic coma and an attempted murder by my own family. Yet I had just accurately mapped out a complex corporate embezzlement scheme using nothing but pure logic and observation. I broke down the exact financial anomalies in the spending habits of Harrison. I calculated the tax loopholes he was exploiting right there from my hospital bed. Warren realized in that exact moment that I possessed an extremely rare and razor-sharp analytical mind. I had a natural and terrifying genius for forensic accounting. I saw numbers not as simple digits, but as clear and undeniable stories of human greed. Warren looked from the silver drive back to my pale and battered face. He did not see a broken and discarded teenager. He saw a weapon. He saw a brilliant and calculating mind that had just been handed the ultimate motive for absolute destruction. He knew I was the exact person he needed to tear the corrupt empire apart. The door to my private recovery suite did not just open. It was shoved inward with aggressive, entitled force. The heavy hinges hit the wall with a loud thud that made the heart monitor beside my bed spike. My father Harrison stormed into the sterile room. He had taken the time to dress perfectly, wearing a tailored cashmere coat over a crisp button-down shirt. He was fully prepared to put on a masterful performance for the hospital staff. He wanted to play the exhausted, long-suffering father dealing with a deeply troubled and rebellious child. He immediately began projecting his voice, ensuring the nurses at the station down the hall could hear every single word. He pointed a rigid finger at me while I lay trapped under the thin hospital blankets. He asked me if I had any idea what time it was. He called me an ungrateful, manipulative girl. He yelled that pulling a pathetic stunt like running away into a blizzard just to embarrass my mother and him was the final straw. He said my sister Sydney was traumatized by my violent behavior in the car. He demanded that I stop faking my illness, get out of the hospital bed, and apologize to the police for wasting their time. He took 2 angry steps toward my bed before he finally realized we were not alone. The suffocating heavy silence in the room suddenly registered in his brain. He turned his head sharply toward the dim corner of the suite. His eyes landed on the imposing figure sitting perfectly still in the leather visitor chair. The air in the room instantly froze. Harrison stopped dead in his tracks. All the arrogant, booming confidence evaporated from his body in a single second. The aggressive, domineering patriarch of my family completely shattered. Warren was sitting with his long legs casually crossed. His ruined, snow-soaked designer overcoat was draped over the back of the chair. He did not stand up to greet my father. He did not even blink. He was simply rotating the heavy military-grade silver flash drive between his fingers. The metal caught the harsh fluorescent light with every slow turn. Harrison recognized the drive immediately. His face drained of all color, turning a sickly ashen gray. His jaw dropped open, but his vocal cords completely failed him. The expensive cashmere coat he wore suddenly looked like a cheap costume compared to the absolute terrifying authority radiating from the billionaire hedge fund manager. Harrison began to tremble. His hands shook so violently that he had to grip the edge of the plastic tray table to keep himself upright. He stared at the silver drive, then up at the cold, predatory eyes of his ultimate boss. He finally managed to force a few pathetic, breathy words out of his throat. He said, "Sir, you cannot be here. You are supposed to be in New York." Warren stopped rotating the flash drive. He closed his large fist around the metal casing and leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. His voice was completely devoid of emotion, quiet, and dangerously lethal. He said, "I just heard a very interesting story about $5 million vanished dollars and the exact reason why your daughter was left to freeze to death on the street." Harrison panicked. Pure, desperate survival instinct kicked in, but he was completely outmatched. He started stuttering, waving his shaking hands frantically in the air. He pointed at me and tried to deploy the exact same lies he had used at the house. He told Warren not to listen to me. He claimed I was severely mentally ill. He said my diabetes caused psychotic delusions. He desperately swore that I had stolen the corporate drive to sabotage his career out of pure jealousy. He begged Warren to believe that I was a pathological liar and a thief. He promised to call hospital security to have me restrained. Warren did not raise his voice. He simply recited the exact financial anomalies I had just mapped out for him minutes earlier. He mentioned the specific shell companies registered under the name of Sydney. He listed the exact routing numbers of the offshore accounts where the overpayments for the Chicago construction project had been funneled. He detailed the repetitive numbering sequences Harrison had used to hide the missing funds in the quarterly reports. He quoted the exact tax loopholes my father had exploited to wash the stolen capital through fake consulting fees. With every single financial detail Warren listed, Harrison shrank physically smaller. His knees buckled slightly. Heavy beads of cold sweat broke out across his forehead, dripping down his face and soaking into his crisp shirt collar. He realized in that exact moment that the game was entirely over. Warren did not just suspect embezzlement. Warren knew the exact anatomy of the crime. And much worse, Harrison realized that I was the one who had just handed the billionaire the blueprint to his destruction. I lay quietly in the hospital bed, watching the absolute destruction of my abuser. The man who had slapped me, stomped on my life-saving medication, and thrown me into a lethal blizzard was now hyperventilating. Harrison literally dropped to his knees on the sterile hospital floor. He clasped his hands together and began begging for mercy. He pleaded about the cost of his lifestyle, the pressure of maintaining his country club image, and how his wife Barbara would leave him if they lost their elite status. He cried like a pathetic broken child, babbling about how Sydney needed money to maintain her social circle. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel the usual guilt that my parents had conditioned me to feel whenever they were upset. I felt cold, profound clarity. I watched the billionaire look down at my weeping father with absolute disgust. Warren stood up slowly, towering over the pathetic man, trembling on the floor. He slipped the silver flash drive into his inner suit pocket. He told Harrison to stand up and stop crying, because they were about to have a very serious discussion regarding the future of his freedom. I watched my father scramble to his feet, entirely subservient and terrified, and I knew that my life as a victim had officially ended. Warren did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The silence in the hospital room was heavy and suffocating as the billionaire looked down at my father. Warren calmly explained the brutal reality of corporate survival. He told Harrison that if he handed that silver flash drive to the federal authorities tonight, the scandal would hit the morning news. The stock of the hedge fund would crash, shareholders would panic, and Warren would lose billions in market value before noon. Warren stated clearly that he cared absolutely nothing about Harrison or his pathetic country club reputation. He cared about recovering his stolen $5 million quietly before the federal investigators dismantled the company. Harrison let out a shaky breath of relief, foolishly believing he had just secured a pardon. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and forced a weak, ingratiating smile. He thanked Warren and promised to quietly return the money. He promised to keep the entire embezzlement scandal a secret. He even had the audacity to suggest that they could handle this like gentlemen. Warren stopped him with a single razor-sharp look. He told Harrison that he was not walking away free. He was simply buying a temporary delay of his prison sentence. Warren reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his sleek smartphone. He placed it on the tray table next to my bed. He informed Harrison that his elite legal team in New York was already drafting an airtight non-disclosure and restitution agreement. The terms were completely non-negotiable. If Harrison refused even a single condition, Warren would press a button, and the authorities would be waiting in the hospital lobby to arrest him for wire fraud and attempted manslaughter. Harrison swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically around the room. He asked what the terms were. Warren laid them out with the cold mechanical precision of an executioner. First, Harrison would have exactly 30 days to liquidate every single asset he owned to repay the $5 million with interest. He would have to sell his luxury cars. He would have to drain his retirement accounts. He would have to secretly mortgage the massive suburban mansion where my mother was currently sleeping. Warren made it explicitly clear that Harrison was about to experience complete financial ruin, and he would have to hide it from his wealthy friends to prevent a public panic. Harrison nodded rapidly, his face pale and slick with sweat. He agreed to the financial restitution. But Warren was not finished. The billionaire turned his cold gaze toward me, then back to my father. He stated the second condition. Harrison and Barbara were to immediately and permanently sever all legal and financial ties to me. Warren knew that even at 18, I was tied to their health insurance, their tax write-offs, and the twisted financial web they used to control me. Warren demanded full legal emancipation documents signed by morning. They would never be allowed to claim me as a dependent, access my medical records, or contact me ever again. Harrison agreed instantly, showing absolutely zero hesitation to throw me away legally, just as he had thrown me into the snow. Then Warren delivered the final devastating blow. He looked directly into the eyes of my father and demanded the immediate, irrevocable transfer of the elite college trust fund belonging to Sydney. Harrison physically recoiled as if he had been shot. The color drained from his face. He gasped and grabbed the edge of the bed. He stammered that Sydney had nothing to do with the stolen money. He begged Warren to leave his golden child out of the punishment. He cried that Sydney needed that massive trust fund to get into a prestigious Ivy League university, to join the right sororities, and to maintain her flawless social standing. He pleaded that taking her money would ruin her entire future. I watched my father weep for the financial future of the sister who had just framed me for corporate theft and left me to die. He had stomped on my life-saving insulin without a second thought, but losing Sydney as college money was breaking his heart. Warren remained entirely unmoved by the theatrical display of parental grief. He leaned in close to Harrison and spoke in a low, dangerous tone. He reminded Harrison that Sydney was a drug-addicted thief who had stolen a highly classified corporate drive to pay off her dealers. He pointed out that Sydney was the exact reason the embezzlement was discovered. Warren stated that the college fund was the penalty for the physical abuse and the medical trauma inflicted upon me. The money would be transferred directly into an independent locked account under my name to cover my medical bills, my future education, and my survival. Harrison dropped his head into his hands. He sobbed loudly, his shoulders shaking with the weight of his absolute defeat. He knew he was trapped. If he refused to surrender the Golden Child U.S. Trust Fund, he would be wearing handcuffs before the sun came up. He would lose his freedom, his status, and everything he had built his arrogant identity upon. The digital document arrived on Warren U.S. phone minutes later. Warren turned the screen toward Harrison and handed him a digital stylus. He ordered my father to sign his name and authorize the total transfer of the funds. Harrison hesitated for one long, agonizing second. He looked at me, his eyes filled with pure, unfiltered hatred. He blamed me for his downfall. He blamed me for the loss of his stolen empire. But he had no choice. His survival instinct overpowered his love for Sydney. Harrison took the stylus with a trembling hand and scrawled his signature across the glowing screen. In a matter of seconds, the massive trust fund that my parents had proudly built for their perfect daughter was completely wiped out. The money was securely routed to a new account, placing my future entirely out of their toxic reach. Warren took the phone back and slipped it into his pocket. He looked down at the broken man on the floor. He told Harrison to get out of the hospital room and begin liquidating his life. He warned him that the 30-day countdown had officially begun. Harrison scrambled to his feet. He did not look back at me. He practically ran out of the recovery suite, a pathetic and ruined man fleeing into the sterile hospital corridor. The heavy door clicked shut behind him, sealing away the abuse, the gaslighting, and the control that had defined my entire existence. I lay in the hospital bed listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor. The financial chains had been completely shattered. My father had just signed away his golden child U.S. future to save his own skin, and I had just been handed the exact resources I needed to rebuild my life from the ashes. The sterile hospital room was finally quiet after the violent departure of my father. The only sound left was the rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor tracking my stabilizing pulse. Then a harsh, aggressive buzzing shattered the peace. My cracked cell phone, which the emergency paramedics had recovered from the frozen pocket of my ruined winter coat, vibrated angrily on the plastic tray table. The cracked screen lit up brightly in the dim room, flashing a glossy photograph of my mother Barbara. She was smiling perfectly in the picture, wearing an expensive designer sun hat on a luxury yacht, projecting the flawless illusion of a deeply loving matriarch. The brutal reality was that just a few short hours ago, she had watched me get dragged out into a lethal freezing blizzard and did not even flinch. I reached out with a heavily bandaged hand and picked up the device. A tiny, deeply conditioned part of me, the traumatized child who had spent 18 years begging for basic maternal affection, expected her to be calling in an absolute panic about my failing health. I assumed the hospital had officially notified her of my near-fatal diabetic coma. I swiped a trembling thumb across the shattered glass to answer and put the phone on speaker, resting the device flat on my chest. I did not even get the chance to speak a single syllable. Barbara did not ask if I was alive. She did not ask if my blood sugar had finally stabilized, or if I was suffering from severe frostbite. She unleashed a torrential, deafening scream that echoed loudly off the sterile hospital walls. She called me an ungrateful, venomous snake. She shrieked that I was a treacherous, manipulative monster who had maliciously used a billionaire to completely destroy my own family. Her voice cracked with pure, unhinged hysteria as she yelled that Harrison had just returned to the estate, completely ruined. She cried that he was frantically stripping the mansion of his luxury watches and desperately searching for the paper deeds to their vacation properties to liquidate them by morning. Then the true sickening nature of her panic fully revealed itself. Barbara was not crying over her husband facing federal prison for corporate fraud. She was violently sobbing over Sydney. She screamed into the phone that I had maliciously stolen the elite college trust fund of my sister. She demanded that I immediately contact the bank and transfer every single dollar back to their control. Her exact words were completely detached from any moral reality. She shrieked that Sydney was inconsolable, locked in her bedroom, because she desperately needed that massive financial fund to secure her spot in an exclusive sorority at a prestigious university. My mother was genuinely prioritizing a college social club over the undeniable fact that her other daughter had just suffered a severe medical trauma and nearly frozen to death. I lay perfectly still against the stiff hospital pillows, listening to her frantic delusional demands. A profound and chilling emotional clarity washed over my entire body. I felt absolutely nothing for the frantic woman on the other end of the line. The lifelong, desperate hunger for her maternal approval simply vanished into thin air. I saw her manipulation tactics with absolute crystal clarity. She called me a vicious thief. She yelled that I had eaten the expensive food she provided, slept under her luxurious roof, and repaid her extreme generosity by stabbing them all in the back. She aggressively ordered me to fix the financial situation immediately before she called the local police to have me arrested for criminal extortion. I waited patiently for her to run out of breath. The heavy silence stretched over the speaker for 3 long seconds. I did not cry. I did not apologize. I did not raise my voice or frantically defend my actions the way I always had in the past. I spoke with a cold, terrifying calmness that I had never possessed before tonight. I told her the money was permanently gone. I stated clearly that the funds were securely locked in an independent, highly restricted account that neither she nor Harrison could ever access again. Barbara gasped, loudly sucking in air, to hurl another massive wave of insults, but I cut her off with a single sharp sentence. I told her that the trust fund was not stolen. I said the money was exactly to buy back the life she had just thrown out into the storm. I told her she had eagerly sold her own daughter to protect a drug-addicted liar, and now the transaction was officially complete. I did not wait for her to process the brutal reality of my words. I pressed the red button and ended the call. The quiet safety of the room rushed back in. I looked down at the cracked phone resting in my hand. It represented every toxic tie to my abusers. It held their contact numbers, their fake holiday messages, and their endless draining demands. I pried the back casing off the device with my fingers and pulled out the small plastic SIM card. I held it firmly between my thumb and index finger and snapped it cleanly in half. I tossed the broken pieces of plastic directly into the trash can next to my bed. The severing was absolute, physical, and permanent. I was officially a ghost to the people who had raised me. A slow, deliberate hand clap broke the silence in the suite. Warren stepped forward from the dark shadows near the doorway. He had been standing there the entire time, silently observing the entire phone call with my mother. He walked slowly over to the side of my bed, his predatory eyes gleaming with genuine, unfiltered respect. He noted that most people, especially teenagers, going through extreme medical trauma, would have completely crumbled under that intense level of emotional manipulation. He said I possessed an incredibly rare and valuable trait. I had the undeniable ability to completely detach human emotion from pure logic when dealing with highly hostile adversaries. Warren reached into his tailored suit pocket and pulled out a sleek, heavy business card. He placed it carefully on my tray table. He told me that my ability to expertly dissect the complex corporate embezzlement scheme of Harrison from a hospital bed was nothing short of brilliant. But he warned me that raw analytical talent was entirely useless without the proper structured weaponization. He offered me a deal right then and there. He would not just let me survive on the seized trust fund. He would personally sponsor my entire higher education. He promised to place me in the most elite, rigorous accounting and finance programs in the entire country. He would give me unrestricted access to the top forensic auditors and legal investigators at his billionaire hedge fund. Warren looked me directly in the eyes and promised that if I agreed to his strict terms, he would forge me into an absolute apex predator in the financial world. He would teach me exactly how to hunt down corrupt executives, systematically dismantle their hidden offshore accounts, and legally destroy their fraudulent empires without a single drop of mercy. I looked at the crisp business card resting on the table, then up at the ruthless billionaire who had just handed me the keys to an incredibly powerful new life. I did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. I accepted his offer. I knew in my soul that the scared diabetic teenager who had been dragged out into the snow was officially dead. In her place, a cold, calculating investigator had just been born. 15 years evaporate like breath on cold glass. I step out of a sleek black town car and look up at the towering glass and steel monolith of a Manhattan skyscraper. The pouring rain slicking the New York pavement does not bother me. I do not feel the cold anymore. At 33, I am no longer the terrified, freezing teenager bleeding out in a snowbank. I am a senior forensic accountant at the most ruthless investigative financial firm on Wall Street. I am the apex predator Warren promised to build. My tailored charcoal suit acts as armor, and my briefcase carries enough financial ammunition to decimate entire corporate boards. I walk through the revolving doors, my heels clicking sharply against the polished granite floor, echoing with absolute authority. The security guards nod respectfully and swipe my access badge for the executive elevator. I have spent the last decade and a half mastering the art of financial destruction, learning to follow the invisible digital threads of human greed. The elevator doors glide open on the 50th floor. The air in the executive suite is thick with expensive cologne and desperate panic. I push open the heavy double doors to the main boardroom without knocking. Sitting at the head of the massive mahogany table is Bradley Holden, a billionaire tech executive who thinks he is smarter than everyone else in the room. His team of high-priced corporate defense lawyers flank him like a useless, expensive shield. Bradley is sweating profusely, tugging at his silk tie, projecting a false air of arrogant indignation. He demands to know why his morning has been interrupted by an auditor. He threatens to call my managing partners and have my career ended before lunch. I do not offer a polite greeting. I do not shake his sweating hand. I walk directly to the opposite end of the long table, place my leather briefcase down, and snap the latches open. The sharp metallic click makes Bradley flinch visibly in his plush leather chair. I pull out exactly 3 pieces of paper and slide them smoothly across the polished wood. They stop right in front of his shaking hands. I tell him to look very closely at the dates printed at the top of the margins. He tries to bluster his way out, raising his voice and puffing out his chest to intimidate me. I silence him with a single razor-sharp look that strips away every ounce of his false bravado. I inform him that my superiors are the ones who sent me here to finalize his professional execution, and his threats are a complete waste of my valuable time. I point directly to the first document. I explain that it is a highly classified bank statement from a supposedly blind trust located in the Cayman Islands. I point to the second document, a detailed wire transfer log originating from his primary corporate charity foundation. I point to the third, a verified property deed for a luxury yacht purchased through an anonymous shell company, registered to his mistress in Miami. I do not raise my voice. I speak with the cold mechanical precision of a surgeon dissecting a corpse on an operating table. I break down exactly how he siphoned $12 million from his own employee pension fund, washed it cleanly through fake vendor invoices, and funneled it directly into the offshore trust to buy the yacht. I detail the specific algorithms he used to hide the missing capital. I map out his entire criminal mind in under 2 minutes, exposing every single hidden transaction he thought was permanently erased. Bradley Yu's high-priced lawyers immediately stop writing on their legal pads. They stare at the 3 documents and simultaneously begin packing their briefcases. They realize instantly that their client is completely radioactive and heading straight for a federal indictment. Bradley drops his head into his hands, hyperventilating loudly as his fraudulent empire crumbles into absolute dust right before his eyes. He begins to beg, offering me highly lucrative consulting positions and massive bribes to just look the other way and bury the paperwork. Right in the middle of his pathetic, desperate breakdown, my smartphone emits a faint, soft beep from my jacket pocket. I do not panic. I do not rush. I simply pull back the tailored sleeve of my blazer, revealing a small white continuous glucose monitor securely adhered to my upper arm. I pull out my phone and calmly tap the device against the sensor on my skin. The screen flashes a perfect stable blood sugar reading, 110, flawless. 15 years ago, this exact disease was weaponized against me. It was used as a cruel excuse by my own blood to throw me away like defective garbage in a blizzard. Today, I wear it like a badge of absolute unwavering control. I manage my complex biology with the exact same ruthless mathematical precision I use to manage hostile corporate takeovers. I slide my phone back into my pocket, entirely unbothered by the sobbing executive sitting in front of me. I pack up my briefcase and snap the latches shut with finality. I look down at Bradley and tell him that federal agents are currently waiting for him in the ground floor lobby, and he has exactly 3 minutes to call his family before his assets are completely frozen. I turn and walk out of the boardroom without looking back, leaving him to his total and utter destruction. The rush of power is a familiar, comforting hum in my veins. As I step back into the sleek hallway, my executive assistant falls into step beside me. She hands me a thick, sealed red folder marked with maximum priority. She informs me that Warren has personally assigned me a new, highly sensitive contract that requires my immediate attention. A massive corporate merger in Chicago requires a rigorous independent financial audit before the ink can dry on the acquisition papers. The acquiring family requested the most ruthless auditor in the firm to verify the assets. I open the red folder as I step into the waiting elevator. I read the names of the executives requesting the audit printed in bold black ink: Harrison and Sidney. The air leaves my lungs for a fraction of a second, but I quickly recover. A cold, highly dangerous smile spreads across my face as the elevator doors slide shut. The past has just scheduled an appointment, and I am going to audit them down to their very last cent. The red classified folder feels heavy in my hands as the elevator descends to the ground floor. I slide into the back of the waiting executive car and immediately spread the documents across the leather seat. I am not looking at family members. I am looking at highly vulnerable corporate targets. 15 years have passed since Harrison signed away his golden child as trust fund to save himself from federal prison. He barely survived the financial ruin Warren inflicted upon him that night. He lost his pristine reputation, his luxury cars, and a massive portion of his wealth. But cockroaches are incredibly resilient. Over the last decade, Harrison clawed his way back from the absolute bottom using every manipulative tactic in his arsenal to rebuild a fragile house of cards. I read the executive summary provided by my managing partners. Harrison is currently serving as the interim chief executive officer of Pinnacle Real Estate, a massive commercial property conglomerate based in Chicago. He is exactly 1 week away from a final board vote that will permanently cement his position as the supreme head of the company. It is the ultimate crown he has spent his entire pathetic life chasing. But his corporate ambition is entirely dependent on a massive multi-billion-dollar joint venture that is currently on the table. I turn the page and look at a glossy, high-resolution photograph of my younger sister. Sydney is 31 years old now, and she has completely reinvented herself. Gone is the reckless, drug-addicted teenager who crashed a Mercedes and left her sister to freeze in the snow. She now masquerades as a high-society philanthropist. She runs a boutique charity foundation wearing designer gowns and hosting extravagant galas to project the ultimate image of elite perfection. The dossier reveals that Sydney is engaged to be married in less than 2 weeks. Her fiancé is Preston, the sole heir to a Silicon Valley tech empire worth billions. Preston is completely and hopelessly blinded by love. He views Sydney as a flawless angel dedicated to saving the world through her charitable endeavors. He believes the polished, wealthy facade my parents have carefully constructed. But Preston does not control the tech empire alone. His family-used corporate board of directors is deeply paranoid and notoriously ruthless. They do not marry into families without performing extreme due diligence. Because this marriage also involves a highly lucrative corporate merger between the tech empire and Harrison U.S. real estate firm, the board laid down an absolute non-negotiable condition. They demanded a comprehensive independent asset transparency audit before Preston is allowed to sign the ironclad prenuptial agreement and before the corporate merger can be finalized. The tech billionaires refused to hire any local Chicago accounting firms. They suspected that Harrison might have corrupt ties in his home city. They wanted absolute, unbiased brutality. They went straight to Wall Street and hired the most feared forensic financial agency in the country. They specifically requested the lead investigator who just made global headlines for dismantling the corrupt empire of Bradley Holden. They requested me. I sit in the quiet luxury of the private jet my firm has chartered for the flight to Chicago. I pour a glass of sparkling water and begin dissecting the preliminary financial disclosures Harrison and Sydney have voluntarily submitted to the tech board. It takes my trained eyes exactly 4 minutes to spot the massive, glaring fractures in their fraudulent narrative. Harrison is claiming a massive personal net worth to impress his future in-laws, but the math is entirely fabricated. He has heavily over-leveraged every single property he owns. He is taking out massive, hidden secondary mortgages to fund the extravagant lifestyle Barbara demands. He is bleeding cash just to maintain the illusion of extreme wealth. But Sydney is the one who has truly mastered the art of criminal deception. I look at the tax returns for her supposedly noble charity foundation. She is using the exact same offshore routing techniques Harrison used 15 years ago. She is siphoning huge donations from wealthy sponsors washing the capital through fake event planning vendors and using the stolen money to pay off staggering underground gambling debts. They are entirely broke, drowning in liabilities and banking everything on this single billionaire marriage to save them from total financial collapse. The absolute poetic justice of the situation makes my pulse steady and calm. They are currently planning a vulgar $1 million society wedding, utterly convinced they have finally secured their place in the billionaire class. They believe this mandatory audit is just a simple administrative formality. They assume some junior accountant will glance at their forged bank statements, check a few boxes, and approve the billion-dollar merger. They have absolutely no idea that the financial Grim Reaper heading to their corporate boardroom is the very same daughter they threw away. As the private jet begins its descent, I look out the window at the sprawling, icy grid of Chicago. The winter weather is harsh, mirroring the exact same freezing temperatures of that night 15 years ago. But I am not shivering in the dark anymore. I am flying above the clouds armed with undeniable legal authority and the full backing of Wall Street. I review my strategy one final time. I will not scream. I will not throw accusations. I will simply walk into their pristine glass boardroom, lay their fraudulent numbers on the table, and watch them suffocate under the weight of their own lies. I instruct my assistant to arrange a secure conference room at the Chicago headquarters of Pinnacle Real Estate for tomorrow morning. I demand that Harrison, Barbara, and Sydney be present for the initial audit review. I request that the legal representatives from the tech board dial into the meeting via a secure monitored phone line. I am going to trap them in a highly professional, entirely legal cage where every single word they say is officially recorded for the federal authorities. They are expecting an easy victory. They are about to face an absolute financial slaughter. The top floor of the Pinnacle Real Estate headquarters features a panoramic glass boardroom overlooking the frozen Chicago skyline. The room is designed to intimidate, filled with imported Italian leather chairs and a massive polished marble table. But the three people currently occupying the space are not intimidated. They are utterly, blindly arrogant. Harrison sits near the head of the table, checking his heavy gold watch and aggressively tapping a platinum pen against the marble. He wears a bespoke, tailored suit, projecting the absolute confidence of a man who believes he is just days away from being crowned the Supreme Chief Executive Officer. Barbara sits next to him, sipping a sparkling water. She is wrapped in designer cashmere, her hair perfectly styled to project the ultimate image of a wealthy charitable society matriarch. She complains to Harrison about the inconvenience of this mandatory meeting, whining that the tech billionaires from California are being entirely too paranoid. Sydney sits across from them, lazily scrolling through her phone and admiring the massive, flawless diamond engagement ring on her left hand. She looks completely unbothered, utterly convinced that her billionaire fiancé, Preston, will blindly protect her from any corporate scrutiny. They all believe this independent audit is nothing more than a tedious administrative hurdle. They expect a junior associate to walk in, ask a few polite questions, and rubber stamp their fraudulent financial disclosures. The heavy glass doors at the far end of the boardroom swing open with a sharp, synchronized click. The idle chatter at the marble table instantly dies. I do not walk into the room like a hesitant subordinate. I walk in with the absolute dominating presence of an executioner. I wear a tailored, bone-white power suit that cuts a sharp silhouette against the dark corporate background. My posture is perfectly rigid, my expression utterly devoid of any human warmth. My executive assistant walks one step behind me, carrying two heavy briefcases packed with catastrophic financial evidence. I move directly to the absolute head of the massive marble table. I do not look at them as I place my briefcase down and snap the latches open. The sharp, metallic sound echoes loudly in the cavernous, silent room. Only then do I raise my eyes and lock my gaze onto the three people sitting frozen in their leather chairs. The physical reaction is instantaneous and violently dramatic. Harrison stops tapping his platinum pen. The pen slips from his numb fingers and clatters loudly onto the marble surface. All the arrogant, booming confidence violently drains from his face, leaving behind a sickly, terrified ash-gray pallor. His jaw literally drops open. He stares at me as if a ghost has just materialized from the frozen ground to drag him to hell. Barbara lets out a sharp, genuine gasp of absolute horror. Her perfectly manicured hand flies up to cover her mouth. Her eyes widen to an impossible size, completely failing to comprehend the reality standing in front of her. She remembers a weak, freezing diabetic teenager she threw out into a lethal blizzard 15 years ago. She is currently looking at a ruthless, high-powered Wall Street executive holding the keys to her total destruction. Sydney drops her phone onto the table. Her arrogant, bored demeanor shatters into a million pieces. She stares at me with wide, terrified eyes, instantly recognizing the sister she framed for corporate theft. The golden child shrinks back into her expensive leather chair, desperately trying to make herself smaller. Nobody speaks. The silence in the glass boardroom is absolute and suffocating. The air conditioning hums quietly overhead, contrasting the intense boiling panic radiating from my biological family. They are completely paralyzed by shock. I do not smile. I do not offer a polite greeting. I do not even acknowledge our shared DNA. I press a button on a small, sleek digital audio recorder and place it dead center on the marble table. The red recording light blinks steadily. I look directly into the terrified eyes of the man who stomped on my life-saving medication. I state my name clearly and loudly for the audio record. I introduce myself as the senior forensic investigator, appointed directly by the board of directors, representing Preston and his tech conglomerate. I state that my sole professional mandate is to conduct an aggressive unrestricted asset transparency audit on the personal and corporate holdings of Harrison and Sydney prior to the execution of the multi-billion-dollar joint venture and the marital contract. Harrison begins to hyperventilate. His chest heaves under his expensive tailored suit. He knows exactly what forensic accounting means. He knows that I do not just look at surface-level tax returns. He knows that I rip corporate structures apart, trace hidden offshore accounts, and hunt down every single buried transaction. And much worse, he knows that I already possess a deep, intimate knowledge of his specific psychological patterns when it comes to hiding stolen money. He desperately tries to salvage the disastrous situation. He forces a weak, shaking smile and stands up from his chair. He attempts to deploy a fake, warm, fatherly tone. He stammers my name, calling me his daughter. He takes a tentative step forward, holding his hands out as if trying to initiate a family reunion. He says it is an absolute miracle to see me again after all these years. He tries to laugh, a pathetic dry sound suggesting that we can surely handle this minor corporate requirement as a family. I do not let him finish the sentence. I cut him off with a voice so cold and sharp, it practically drops the temperature in the room. I raise a single hand, forcing him to stop dead in his tracks. I inform him that if he attempts to cross the professional boundary or refer to me by any familial title again, I will immediately terminate the meeting and report to the tech board that he is attempting to manipulate an independent auditor. Harrison slowly sinks back into his chair, utterly defeated. Barbara is shaking visibly, her hands clutching the edge of the marble table to keep herself grounded. Sydney looks like she is about to be physically sick. They are completely trapped in a glass cage of their own making. They realize with absolute horrifying clarity that the billion-dollar merger, the lavish society wedding, and their entire elite social standing are resting entirely in the hands of the very person they tried to murder. I pull out the first stack of financial disclosures they submitted to the tech board. I tap the papers against the table, the sound ringing like a judge striking a gavel. I look at Sydney and tell her we are going to start by discussing the highly irregular vendor invoices flowing out of her boutique charity foundation. The financial slaughter officially begins. The heavy silence in the glass boardroom shatters as Barbara completely changes her tactical approach. She realizes instantly that Harrison deploying his arrogant authority has failed spectacularly. Her survival instincts kick in, and she switches to the only weapon she has left: emotional manipulation. Barbara stands up so quickly that her heavy wooden chair scrapes loudly against the polished floor. Her expensive diamond bracelets clink together as she presses her hands to her chest. She forces large, dramatic tears into her eyes, her face contorting into a perfect, practiced mask of absolute maternal anguish. She rushes around the massive marble table, her designer heels clicking frantically. She holds her arms wide open, aiming directly for me. She begins to wail, her voice echoing loudly in the cavernous room. She cries out my name, sobbing about how much she missed her baby girl. She claims that every single day of the last 15 years was pure agony without me. She lies flawlessly, saying they searched everywhere, that she prayed every night for my safe return, and that her heart has been broken since the night I disappeared. She is banking entirely on the hope that the traumatized, unloved teenager inside me is still desperate for a motherly embrace. Right on cue, Sydney joins the theatrical performance. She stands up from her leather chair, clutching her hands together tightly against her chest. She perfectly plays the role of the terrified, remorseful little sister. Huge tears spill over her carefully applied makeup. She looks at me with wide, pleading eyes and begs for my forgiveness. She says she was just a stupid, reckless teenager back then, that she made a terrible, unforgivable mistake, and that the guilt has haunted her every single day. She tells me that she is getting married to Preston soon, and she desperately needs her big sister to stand by her side. It is a highly calculated, sickeningly sweet performance designed to completely disarm the auditor and protect her billionaire wedding at all costs. I do not flinch. I do not raise my voice, and I certainly do not cry. As Barbara lunges forward to wrap her arms around my shoulders, I simply take one precise, deliberate step backward. Her arms close around empty air. She stumbles slightly, her expensive perfume washing over me, suffocating but entirely ineffective. She looks up at me, her fake tears pausing as genuine confusion crosses her features. She expects a dramatic reunion, a tearful screaming match, or at least a crack in my professional armor. She gets absolutely nothing. I look down at the crying woman with complete clinical detachment. I raise my right hand and gesture smoothly to my executive assistant standing quietly in the corner of the room. He immediately dims the overhead boardroom lights and taps a command into his tablet. The high-resolution laser projector mounted on the ceiling powers on with a low mechanical hum. A massive, brilliantly illuminated spreadsheet flashes across the entire frosted glass wall behind me. I look directly into Barbara's panicked eyes, then shift my cold gaze to my sister. My voice is sharp, level, and utterly devoid of any familial warmth. I tell them to please maintain a strict professional distance. I state clearly that we are not here to resolve childhood grievances or stage a family reunion. We are here to work. I turn slightly toward the glowing wall of numbers and deliver the absolute kill shot. I inform the room that I currently see $3 million fraudulently reported in the boutique charity fund, and I need Sydney to explain the vanished capital right now. The fake tears instantly dry up on Sydney U.S. face. The blood violently drains from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. Barbara freezes exactly where she stands, her arms dropping limply to her sides as the reality of my words crashes down upon her. Harrison lets out a strangled gasp from the other end of the table. I do not give them a single second to formulate a new lie. I pick up a laser pointer from the table and direct the bright green dot onto the massive spreadsheet. I break down the financial slaughter methodically, exactly the way Warren trained me. I point to the tax returns submitted by Sydney for her supposedly noble charity foundation. I highlight a series of massive six-figure donations made by wealthy Chicago socialites meant for underprivileged youth programs. Then I switch the slide. The screen flashes to a heavily encrypted wire transfer log that I legally subpoenaed from a Delaware banking institution. I trace the bright green laser across the screen, showing exactly how the $3 million did not go to any youth programs. I explain that Sydney routed the donor funds directly to a luxury event planning vendor registered in Delaware. I tap the screen and reveal that the event planning company does not exist. It is a phantom vendor, a hollow shell company registered to a post office box. I speak with the rhythmic, terrifying precision of a ticking time bomb. I reveal that my forensic team tracked the IP addresses authorizing those specific wire transfers. They originated directly from the secure Wi-Fi network inside the Pinnacle Real Estate Executive Suite, specifically from the registered MAC address of Sydney U.S. personal laptop. I watch Sydney sink back into her chair, her entire body shaking violently as I publicly eviscerate her flawless society image. I switch the slide one final time. The massive screen now displays the ultimate destination of the washed charity funds. I read the transaction receipts aloud for the audio recorder on the table. The $3 million were systematically funneled into high-stakes underground poker syndicates and aggressive luxury debt collection agencies operating out of Macau. Sydney has been gambling away millions in stolen charity funds while posing as a philanthropic angel for her billionaire fiancé. Harrison slams his fist onto the marble table, desperate to stop the bleeding. He yells that these documents are fabricated, that I am conducting an illegal witch hunt to destroy his daughter, U.S. future marriage out of petty spite. I turn my cold eyes to my father and press a button on my remote. The screen shifts to a highly classified corporate ledger. I point the laser at the bottom of the fraudulent tax filings I just exposed. I highlight the digital authorization signature. I inform Harrison that he personally co-signed every single one of those fake charity tax returns in his capacity as the interim CEO of Pinnacle Real Estate. I state clearly for the recording that his signature legally makes him a direct accessory to federal wire fraud, charity embezzlement, and massive tax evasion. The financial trap has officially snapped shut, and there is absolutely no way out. The boardroom doors glide shut behind me, sealing my biological family inside their newly constructed financial tomb. I do not stay to watch them suffocate in their panic. I pack my heavy leather briefcase and take the private executive elevator down to the lobby, leaving the digital audio recorder running on the polished marble table to capture their inevitable explosive meltdown. Within 48 hours, Harrison launches his desperate counterattack. He operates exactly as a cornered rat does, relying on the only weapon he has ever successfully wielded: money and corrupt influence. He leverages his remaining country club contacts to secure a private encrypted phone call with the senior managing partners of my investigative firm in New York. He assumes that every single person on Wall Street has a negotiable price. Harrison offers a massive 8-figure consulting retainer to my firm, strictly under the table, disguised cleverly as a future corporate partnership with Pinnacle Real Estate. He promises guaranteed quarterly kickbacks routed through anonymous shell companies. The only condition he demands is my immediate and permanent removal from the tech merger audit. He politely requests that a more seasoned, compliant partner take over the file, subtly hinting that my personal family history makes me a volatile and dangerous liability to the merger. Harrison does not realize that my firm is not a standard spineless accounting agency. We are a financial hit squad directly funded and protected by Warren. My managing partner puts Harrison on speakerphone in the glass-enclosed New York office, records the blatant bribery attempt, and forwards the raw audio file directly to my secure inbox. The managing partner informs Harrison with absolute brutal clarity that I hold total unilateral authority over the tech merger file. He states that I am completely untouchable, and any further attempts to interfere with my audit will be instantly reported to the federal authorities as witness tampering, corporate bribery, and extortion. Harrison hangs up the phone in complete, abject terror. His money is entirely useless. His corrupt influence is dead. The realization that he cannot buy his way out of this slaughter pushes his family over the edge of rationality. The sheer panic shatters Sydney completely. The golden child cannot handle the undeniable fact that her billionaire wedding and her entire high society existence are actively burning to the ground. She loses whatever fragile grip she has on her manufactured philanthropic persona. Late Friday evening, I exit the private elevator into the dimly lit subterranean parking garage beneath the Pinnacle Real Estate headquarters. The cold concrete walls echo loudly with the sharp sound of my heels. I press the button on my key fob to unlock my rented black sedan. Before I can reach the driver's side door, a figure steps out from behind a massive concrete pillar, aggressively blocking my path. It is Sydney. She is not wearing her fake charitable smile anymore. Her expensive designer clothes look hastily thrown on, her hair is disheveled, and her hands are clenched into tight, shaking fists. The smell of exhaust fumes mixes sickeningly with her heavy, expensive perfume. The desperate, malignant narcissist is fully exposed under the harsh, flickering fluorescent parking lot lights. She marches directly toward me, her heels clicking aggressively against the dirty concrete. She does not play the crying victim this time. She drops the act and goes straight for the throat. She points a manicured finger directly at my face and demands that I drop the corporate audit immediately. She screams that I am just a bitter, jealous outcast who came back to Chicago to ruin her perfect life out of pure malicious spite. I do not back away. I stand perfectly still, my posture radiating the cold, mechanical discipline I have honed for 15 years on Wall Street. I look at her as if she is nothing more than a minor, irritating rounding error on a balance sheet. I tell her to lower her voice immediately before I call the building security to have her physically removed for harassing a federal auditor. Sydney lets out a harsh, unhinged laugh that echoes violently in the empty, cavernous garage. She crosses her arms and steps uncomfortably close, her eyes flashing with pure, unfiltered malice. She threatens me directly, spelling out their new, desperate strategy. She says that if I do not sign off on the clean audit by Monday morning, she and Barbara will completely destroy my professional reputation. She sneers and says they have already compiled a massive damaging file on my past. She claims they will go straight to the major business press, to the tech board, and to my managing partners with a fabricated story about my mental instability. Sydney threatens to tell the entire world that I am a deeply disturbed obsessive stalker who fabricated the financial evidence just to exact revenge on a loving, supportive family. She says they still have my old teenage medical records regarding my diabetes and depression, and they plan to twist that history to prove I am suffering from severe paranoid delusions. She smiles cruelly and says no one in the financial sector will ever hire me again once they are finished dragging my name through the mud. She promises to make sure I lose my prestigious job and end up right back in the freezing snow where I belong. I look at her desperate, sweating face and feel absolutely nothing. No fear, no intimidation, no anger. I do not raise my voice to match her hysterical pitch. I speak with the chilling surgical precision of a predator closing the final trap. I inform Sydney that she is currently threatening a senior investigator in a corporate building equipped with high-definition security cameras and parabolic microphones. I tap the side of my heavy leather briefcase and tell her that every single threat she just made has been mentally documented and will be added as an obstruction of justice charge to the rapidly growing wire fraud case against her. I tell her that blackmailing an auditor with falsified medical records is a federal offense that carries a mandatory minimum prison sentence. I watch the cruel smile instantly vanish from her face, replaced by a sudden dawning terror. I press the button on my key fob again, unlocking my car door with a sharp beep. I look Sydney dead in the eyes and tell her that her billionaire fiancé is going to receive a certified audited copy of her underground gambling debts before breakfast tomorrow morning. I tell her to enjoy her final weekend of freedom, because by Monday she will not be planning a lavish society wedding. She will be shopping for a criminal defense attorney. I slide smoothly into my car, start the engine, and leave her standing completely frozen and alone in the cold, damp shadows of the parking garage. Monday morning in Manhattan begins with the sharp ringing of my secure office line. I am sitting at my desk, finalizing the executive summary of the charity embezzlement, when my managing partner summons me to the top-floor glass conference room. The urgency in his voice is unusual. I grab my tablet and take the elevator up, expecting a routine update on the federal wire fraud filings. Instead, I walk into a room thick with absolute corporate tension. My managing partner is not alone. Sitting next to him, via a highly secure video link, is the lead corporate counsel for the Silicon Valley Tech Board, the very people who hired me to investigate the impending marriage of my sister. Spread across the center of the dark oak table is a thick manila folder. My managing partner pushes it toward me with a grim expression. He informs me that this package was hand-delivered by a private courier directly to our Wall Street headquarters and simultaneously leaked to the senior board members of the tech conglomerate in California. I open the folder. The first page is a letter printed on expensive heavy cardstock. It is signed by Barbara. My mother has unleashed her absolute most vile, desperate weapon. She realizes that Harrison failed to buy me off, and Sydney failed to intimidate me in a dark parking garage. Barbara has bypassed financial bribery entirely and gone straight for total character assassination. She is deploying the ultimate gaslighting maneuver on a massive corporate scale. I read her letter. It is a masterpiece of maternal manipulation. Barbara paints herself as a grieving, terrified mother desperately trying to protect her innocent family from a deeply disturbed child. She claims that I am not a legitimate financial investigator, but a severely mentally ill woman executing a decades-long obsessive vendetta. She writes that I intentionally infiltrated this corporate audit to destroy my sister out of pure, unadulterated jealousy. But Barbara does not stop at a simple letter. She has included medical records. I flip to the second page and stare at highly detailed, official-looking hospital charts from 15 years ago. They are my medical records from the exact night they threw me into the blizzard. but they have been heavily maliciously altered. Barbara has paid someone to doctor the files. The forged documents claim that my severe hypoglycemia caused permanent brain damage, resulting in diabetic encephalopathy. The fake charts list a series of terrifying psychiatric diagnoses, including severe paranoid delusions, borderline personality disorder, and chronic pathological lying. The forged medical summary states that I suffered a complete psychotic break at 18, violently attacked my sister in a moving vehicle, and ran away from a loving home to live on the streets. Barbara included a fake psychiatric evaluation, claiming I possess a dangerous fixation on ruining the financial reputation of my father. She has expertly weaponized my type 1 diabetes, turning a biological autoimmune disease into a fabricated mental health crisis designed to strip away every ounce of my professional credibility. The tech board lawyer speaks through the video monitor. He sounds deeply alarmed. He explains that his clients are about to merge a multi-billion-dollar technology empire with Pinnacle Real Estate. They cannot risk their corporate reputation on an auditor who might be fabricating evidence due to a psychotic family vendetta. The lawyer states that Preston is highly disturbed by these medical revelations about his future sister-in-law. Barbara has successfully planted a massive seed of doubt. The tech board is officially demanding an immediate halt to my financial investigation until these psychiatric allegations can be verified. I look down at the forged medical documents designed to end my entire career. A normal person would break down in tears. A normal person would scream about the injustice, beg their boss to believe them, or panic at the sight of their own mother trying to destroy their sanity on a national corporate stage. I do none of those things. I do not feel a single drop of panic. I feel the cold, calculating thrill of an investigator who has just been handed the exact rope the criminals will use to hang themselves. I look up at the video monitor and directly address the tech board lawyer. I do not raise my voice. I do not display an ounce of defensive emotion. I speak with surgical chilling precision. I inform the room that my mother just committed federal wire fraud, medical identity theft, and corporate defamation across state lines. I tap my manicured finger directly onto the signature of the doctor at the bottom of the psychiatric evaluation. I tell the lawyer to run a simple background check on that specific medical license number. I know instantly that the signature belongs to a disgraced private physician who played golf with my father 15 years ago, a man who lost his medical license a decade ago for writing fraudulent prescriptions for wealthy suburban housewives. I point out the date formatting on the hospital letterhead, proving it uses a digital font template that was not even invented until 5 years after the supposed date of my hospitalization. I dismantle the forged medical records with the exact same ruthless mathematical logic I used to dismantle fake tax returns. I explain that Barbara is not a terrified mother. She is a desperate cornered accomplice to a massive charity embezzlement ring, and this forged medical dossier is her panicked attempt to throw a smoke bomb into the room before the federal agents arrive. My managing partner watches me completely dissect the fraudulent paperwork. He has known me for years. He knows my mind is flawless, sharp, and entirely sane. He knows that Warren personally vetted my psychological resilience before unleashing me on Wall Street. He looks at the video screen and tells the tech lawyer that my firm stands behind my audit with absolute unyielding certainty. However, corporate protocol is a rigid machine. The tech board lawyer, though, clearly shaken by my immediate dismantling of the forgery, insists that they must follow strict compliance rules. Any formal accusation of severe mental instability regarding a lead auditor requires a mandatory temporary suspension of the investigation until an independent legal review clears the claim. The lawyer officially requests that I step down from the tech merger file for 48 hours. My managing partner looks at me, his eyes conveying a silent strategic message. We both know exactly what this means. We have to play along with the corporate bureaucracy to maintain absolute legal perfection. I nod slowly. I close the manila folder and slide it back across the table. I agree to the temporary suspension. I accept the 48-hour stand-down order. I walk out of the glass conference room and head back to my office. I know exactly what is happening in Chicago right now. Barbara and Harrison are popping expensive champagne. They believe their malicious low blow attack actually worked. They think they have successfully discredited the crazy daughter and saved their fraudulent empire just in the nick of time. They are completely convinced that they have won. They have absolutely no idea that I am going to let them celebrate their fake victory, gather all their elite friends into one room, and then publicly slaughter them. I walk back into my corner office and begin placing my files into a secure locked drawer. To the rest of the executive floor, it looks exactly like a disgraced auditor packing up her desk, pending a severe psychiatric review. It is a flawless corporate theater performance. My managing partner walks past my glass door and gives me a single imperceptible nod. The 48-hour suspension is not a punishment. It is a precisely timed tactical pause. It gives the federal authorities exactly enough time to secure the grand jury indictments without alerting Harrison to the impending strike. I pull out a secured burner phone and dial a direct encrypted line. Warren answers on the first ring. I tell him the bait has been taken, and the targets are actively celebrating their fake victory. Warren tells me to catch the evening flight to Chicago and prepare to burn their empire to the ground. 1,000 miles away in Illinois, my biological family is actively popping expensive champagne corks. Harrison and Barbara believe they have just executed the most brilliant manipulation of their entire miserable lives. They assume the tech board from California was completely terrified by the forged medical records and has permanently disqualified my audit out of fear. Harrison receives a polite corporate email stating the financial review is undergoing a standard administrative delay. He reads that brief message as absolute victory. He believes the massive billion-dollar merger will now proceed on schedule, and his promotion to chief executive officer is permanently secured. He immediately authorizes a massive release of company funds to throw the most extravagant engagement and merger announcement gala the city has ever seen. The venue they select is a historic gilded ballroom in the heart of downtown Chicago. They spare absolutely no expense because they believe they are spending the endless tech fortune of their future son-in-law. Crystal chandeliers are polished until they blind the eye. Thousands of imported white orchids are flown in to construct massive floral arches framing the entrance. A famous chef is hired to design a 10-course tasting menu for 300 members of the absolute elite upper class. Barbara spends the entire week visiting luxury spas and bragging to every single woman at her exclusive country club. She spins a tragic but heroic tale of how she bravely protected her family from a deeply disturbed estranged daughter who tried to ruin her perfect younger child out of pure mental illness. Her wealthy friends swallow the lie whole, offering her fake sympathy and praising her incredible maternal strength. Sydney is currently living in an absolute state of euphoric delusion. The terrified girl who cornered me in the parking garage is completely gone. She is back to playing the flawless philanthropic bride. She walks through the grand ballroom during the rehearsal barking aggressive orders at the event planners and demanding absolute perfection. She looks at her massive diamond engagement ring and truly believes she has successfully washed $3 million of stolen charity funds. She thinks her underground gambling debts will be quietly paid off the very second she signs the marriage certificate. She smiles at Preston when he flies in from Silicon Valley, playing the sweet, innocent angel who just survived a terrible family ordeal. Preston holds her hand, completely oblivious to the fact that he is engaged to a predatory criminal. Friday evening arrives. The city of Chicago is covered in a fresh layer of pristine white snow. The luxury sedans and stretch limousines begin pulling up to the illuminated ballroom. The wealthiest corporate titans, real estate magnates, and tech billionaires gather under one roof to celebrate the creation of a massive new financial dynasty. Harrison stands at the entrance wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo, greeting the powerful brokers with a wide, arrogant smile. He feels completely invincible. He believes he has successfully beaten the system, outsmarted a Wall Street forensic auditor, and secured his elite legacy forever. He poses for photographs with Barbara holding his arm, They toast to their brilliant future. They have absolutely no idea that the federal government has already quietly frozen their offshore accounts. I am not sitting in my Manhattan apartment crying over a suspended license. I am sitting in the back of a black car idling 3 blocks away from the glamorous ballroom. I am wearing a tailored bone-white suit that cuts a terrifyingly sharp silhouette against the dark leather seats. I am holding a red priority folder containing the finalized, unredacted financial slaughter of my entire biological family. I check the secure messaging app on my phone. The federal agents are currently moving into position at the service entrances of the venue waiting for my signal. Warren is already inside the ballroom, mingling with the tech board directors who invited him as their primary majority shareholder. I look out the window at the falling snow and take a deep, steadying breath. The weather tonight is exactly like the blizzard they threw me into 15 years ago. But this time I am not the one who is going to freeze. The 48-hour suspension is officially over. The trap has snapped completely shut. I tell my driver to pull up to the front entrance. It is time to walk into the light and show them exactly what a real nightmare looks like. The grand ballroom of the historic Chicago Gilded Hotel is a cathedral of glass and gold. Crystal chandeliers hang like frozen explosions from the vaulted ceilings, casting a shimmering light over the 300 members of the world U.S. absolute financial elite. This is the summit of Harrison U.S. life. He stands at the center of a circle of tech billionaires and real estate magnates, his chest puffed out under a custom $3,000 tuxedo. He holds a glass of rare vintage Pinot Noir, swirling the dark red liquid with the steady hand of a man who believes he has finally conquered his enemies. To his left, Barbara is draped in midnight blue silk and $1 million worth of borrowed diamonds. She is laughing a bright and artificial sound as she tells the board members how her family has always valued integrity above all else. Sydney stands beside her fiancé Preston, looking like a flawless porcelain doll in a white designer gown that cost more than a suburban house. She feels the weight of the massive diamond on her finger and smiles, convinced that by midnight, her $3 million theft will be a forgotten ghost buried under the weight of a tech empire U.S. billions. Harrison looks toward the heavy gold-leaf double doors at the far end of the hall. He checked his watch exactly 1 minute ago. The gala is running perfectly. The merger announcement is scheduled for 10 minutes from now. He leaned in and whispered to a major shareholder that tonight is not just a business deal, but a restoration of a dynasty. He feels a surge of intoxicating power. He truly believes his malicious strike against me worked. He thinks the forged medical records Barbara sent have permanently silenced the only person who knew the truth. In his mind, I am currently sitting in a dark apartment in New York, stripped of my license and drowning in the shame of a manufactured psychiatric breakdown. He takes a long, triumphant sip of his wine, savoring the taste of absolute victory. Suddenly, the music from the live string quartet falters. The rhythmic hum of elite conversation drops into a confused, heavy silence. The massive double doors do not just open. They are thrown wide with an aggressive, synchronized force that echoes like a gunshot through the silent ballroom. The security guards at the entrance step back immediately, their heads bowed in instinctive respect. I walk through the threshold. I do not creep in like an uninvited guest. I march into the light with the absolute dominating presence of a high priestess of justice. I am wearing a tailored, bone-white power suit that cuts through the sea of black tuxedos like a razor. The fabric is sharp, the lines are lethal, and my eyes are cold enough to freeze the champagne in the glasses. I am not the ghost of the girl they left in the snow. I am the physical manifestation of their inevitable reckoning. But I am not alone. Walking exactly 1/2 step beside me, his presence radiating a gravitational pull of sheer power, is Warren. The ballroom collectively exhales in shock. Warren is not just a billionaire hedge fund manager tonight. He is the man who quietly spent the last 48 hours purchasing the remaining floating shares of the tech conglomerate. He is now the single largest majority shareholder of the very company Sydney is trying to marry into. He is the master of the house, and I am his chosen weapon. We move through the crowd like a storm front. The socialites part before us in a wave of silk and perfume. I do not look at them. My gaze is locked onto the man at the center of the room. Harrison is frozen. He looks as if he has been turned to stone by a prehistoric curse. His face, which was flushed with wine and arrogance seconds ago, undergoes a terrifying transformation. The blood drains from his skin so violently that he turns the color of a funeral shroud. His eyes bulge, tracking my movement with a mixture of disbelief and primal terror. He looks at me, then his eyes dart to Warren, then back to the bone-white suit I am wearing. He realizes in a single agonizing heartbeat that the 48-hour suspension was a lie. He realizes that I never lost my power. He realizes that I have walked into his sanctuary with the man who owns his future. The crystal glass in Harrison's hand begins to tremble. The vibration is so intense that the red wine sloshes over the rim, staining his white silk shirt like a fresh chest wound. He tries to speak, his mouth opening and closing, but his throat has completely constricted. He is suffocating on the dry air of his own ballroom. The silence is absolute. 300 people watch as the billionaire chairman and the forensic auditor stop exactly 3 feet in front of the family that tried to murder her. I look Harrison dead in the eye. I do not say a word. I simply reach into my white jacket and pull out a red priority folder. The sound of Harrison's glass hitting the marble floor is deafening. It shatters into 1,000 jagged diamonds. The Pinot Noir splatters across the white floor, soaking into the hem of Sydney U.S. wedding gown. Harrison does not even look down at the mess. His hands are shaking so violently that he has to grab the back of Barbara's chair to keep from collapsing. Barbara's face has gone ashen, her eyes wide with the realization that her character assassination attempt has backfired into a suicide mission. Warren breaks the silence. His voice is a low tectonic rumble that carries to every corner of the room. He looks at the tech board members and informs them that the independent audit is officially complete. He states that the senior investigator has discovered a terminal infection in the Pinnacle real estate accounts that requires immediate public surgery. I step forward, closing the final inch of space between me and my father. I can smell the sour sweat of his panic. I hold the red folder out, my hand perfectly steady. I tell him that he was right about one thing. I tell him that a blizzard is coming. But then I lean in and whisper, so only he and Barbara can hear. I tell them that this time I brought the storm to them. I drop the folder onto the table. The sound is final. The payoff has arrived. I do not scream. I do not throw a glass of wine or demand a tearful apology. I simply reach into the inner pocket of my tailored white suit and pull out a sleek wireless presentation remote. I press a single button. Instantly, the massive high-definition screens surrounding the grand ballroom go completely black. The romantic soft focus montage of Sydney and Preston smiling on a private beach vanishes in a fraction of a second. In its place, a complex, terrifyingly detailed web of financial wire transfers illuminates the room in a stark, unforgiving white light. The collective gasp from 300 members of the financial elite sounds like all the oxygen being violently sucked out of the room. I signal the audio technician at the back of the hall. He immediately hands me a microphone. I do not tap it to test the sound. I bring it to my lips and my voice echoes through the cavernous space with the terrifying absolute clarity of a federal indictment. I introduce myself properly to the silent crowd. I state my full name, my professional credentials, and my position as the senior forensic investigator representing Wall Street. I look directly at the senior board directors of the tech conglomerate, who are sitting completely frozen in the front row. I announce that the mandated independent asset transparency audit of Pinnacle Real Estate and the associated family holdings is officially complete. I state clearly that the proposed multi-billion-dollar merger is structurally corrupt and built entirely on a foundation of severe premeditated fraud. I press the remote. The screen shifts to a massive spreadsheet. I point a bright green laser pointer directly at the first column. I turn my cold gaze to Preston, who is staring at the glowing wall in absolute confusion. I tell the young billionaire to look very closely at the routing numbers originating from his family philanthropic foundation. I explain that the $3 million charitable grant, meant to fund underprivileged youth education programs, never reached a single school. I trace the laser across the screen, showing the exact digital path the stolen money took. The funds bounced rapidly through 3 anonymous shell companies registered in Delaware. I state clearly that those shell companies are registered directly to the Social Security number of my sister. I follow the line to its final destination, showing the money landing directly into the offshore accounts of an aggressive high-stakes luxury debt collection agency operating out of Macau. I announced to the entire room that his beautiful charitable fiancée did not use his money to save the world. Sydney used $3 million of stolen charity funds to pay off her massive underground gambling debts. Sydney drops to her knees right there on the polished marble floor. Her expensive designer wedding gown pools around her like a deflating parachute. She grabs Preston by the arm, weeping hysterically, swearing it is a massive mistake and begging him to believe her. Preston does not comfort her. He does not bend down to help her up. He looks at the damning financial evidence glowing on the wall, then looks down at the woman he thought he knew. He physically rips his arm out of her frantic grasp, his face twisting in complete visceral revulsion. He steps away from her as if she is highly contagious. But I am not finished. The financial slaughter has only just begun. I press the remote again. The screen shifts to a highly classified property deed and a series of escalated commercial loan agreements. I turn my eyes to my father. Harrison is gripping the edge of a catering table so hard his knuckles are pure white. He knows exactly what document is glowing on the wall. The sweat is pouring down his face, ruining his custom tuxedo. I announce to the silent ballroom that Harrison has been running a desperate, highly illegal Ponzi scheme for years just to maintain his fake billionaire lifestyle. I explain that he is currently drowning in over-leveraged secondary mortgages and facing total financial collapse. I point the laser at the top of the new document. It is the deed to the massive Silicon Valley estate that the family of Preston purchased outright as a wedding gift for the young couple. I inform the room that Harrison used his position as the interim chief executive officer of Pinnacle Real Estate to illegally access the confidential escrow accounts during the property transfer. But he went much further than simple corporate embezzlement. I zoom in on the digital signature at the bottom of the $30 million commercial loan agreement. I state clearly for the entire room and the federal recording devices that Harrison secretly leveraged the newlywed mansion as collateral for a high-interest corporate loan to quietly pay off his own massive toxic debt. I zoom the projector in closer, making the signature massive on the screen. I look directly at the groom and tell Preston that my father expertly forged his signature on the loan documents to steal his house before the wedding even happened. I explain that Harrison committed severe identity theft, wrapping his future son-in-law in $30 million of toxic, highly illegal debt without his knowledge or consent. The ballroom erupts into absolute uncontrolled chaos. Tech billionaires are pulling out their phones, shouting frantic orders to their high-priced legal teams. The board directors of the tech company stand up simultaneously, their faces purple with rage, pointing furiously at Harrison. The real estate magnates from Chicago back away from my father, instantly recognizing that he is completely radioactive. Harrison tries to shout over the deafening noise. He waves his hands desperately, screaming that the documents are fabricated, that I am a mentally ill woman conducting a smear campaign. He tries to grab a microphone from a nearby podium, but the audio technicians have already cut his power. He is gesturing wildly, hyperventilating, looking exactly like a trapped animal in a cage of glass and gold. He looks to Barbara for support, but my mother is backing away from him, her hands covering her face, as the elite society she worshipped turns its collective back on her. They are drowning in a sea of undeniable numbers, and the numbers do not know how to lie. The deafening uproar in the ballroom is suddenly pierced by a shrill, hysterical scream. Barbara shoves her way to the center of the polished marble floor, her expensive midnight blue gown twisting violently around her legs. She points a trembling, jewel-encrusted finger directly at my face. She shrieks to the crowd of panicked billionaires that I am completely insane. She screams that none of the financial documents on the screens are real, claiming they are all digital fabrications designed by a deeply disturbed mind. She begs the tech board directors to remember the medical files she sent them yesterday. She yells that I am a severely paranoid woman who is hallucinating this entire corporate conspiracy just to exact a sick, twisted revenge against a loving family. She plays the desperate weeping mother, perfectly dropping to her knees next to Sydney and wrapping her arms around her crying daughter. Barbara begs the elite room to look at me, calling me a dangerous monster who escaped psychiatric care to ruin a beautiful wedding out of pure, unadulterated jealousy. I do not raise my voice to match her frantic hysteria. I do not defend my sanity or try to argue with a desperate liar. I simply look down at her from my position at the front of the room, my face a mask of absolute, impenetrable ice. A cold, razor-sharp smile slowly spreads across my lips. I look over at Warren, who is standing near the main exit with his arms casually crossed, watching his meticulously designed trap spring completely shut. I turn my attention back to the massive crowd of horrified executives. I state clearly into the microphone that my mother is entirely correct about one single detail. I tell the room that she is right that my family attempted to use my medical history against me. I raise the presentation remote high in the air for every single person to see. I press the final red button. The massive high-definition screens illuminating the ballroom instantly switch from complex financial spreadsheets to a stark, pulsing green audio waveform. The room goes entirely dead silent. You could hear a diamond pin drop on the marble floor. Then a crisp, high-definition audio recording floods the cavernous space through the state-of-the-art surround sound system. It is the raw security feed from the glass boardroom at Pinnacle Real Estate headquarters, recorded exactly 1 week ago. Harrison's voice booms across the silent gala. It is not his polished, charming public relations voice. It is his cruel, arrogant, private tone. Every single person in the room hears him perfectly. The recording plays his exact, unfiltered words. He says, "We just forged the remaining loan authorizations. If the auditors catch the offshore routing, we just push all of this toxic debt onto Paige. She is the perfect scapegoat. We already doctored the hospital charts. She had a breakdown. She had depression. We leak the fake psychiatric files to the tech board and say she orchestrated the fraud during a manic episode. No one in the financial sector will ever believe a sick, unstable girl over a chief executive officer. We lock her up in a facility, and the billion-dollar merger goes through flawlessly." The audio cuts out, leaving a ringing, catastrophic silence in its wake. The collective gasp from the 300 elite guests sounds like a physical, violent blow to the chest. The absolute premeditated evil of a father actively planning to frame his own daughter and lock her in a psychiatric ward just to steal a company sends a visceral shockwave through the entire room. The wealthy facade is completely and utterly obliterated. There is no spinning this. There is no public relations firm on earth that can clean up a high-definition digital confession of corporate fraud and parental betrayal. The patriarch of the Silicon Valley tech empire, Preston's father, steps forward from the front row. He is shaking with pure, unadulterated rage. His face is crimson. He looks at Harrison, who is now physically leaning against a decorative stone pillar just to remain standing. The tech billionaire announces in a booming, furious voice that the joint venture is permanently terminated, effective immediately. He turns to his high-powered corporate counsel and orders them right then and there to file a massive, relentless lawsuit against Pinnacle Real Estate for criminal misrepresentation and attempted fraud. Preston does not even look at Sydney. He strips the designer boutonniere from his tuxedo lapel and drops it onto the floor, crushing it under his expensive shoe. He looks down at the golden child crying on the marble and tells her that the engagement is entirely cancelled. He demands that his private security team escort his family out of the contaminated building instantly. He turns his back on her, leaving her weeping uncontrollably in a ruined, useless wedding gown. The final hammer falls before my biological family can even process the total destruction of their dynasty. Warren gives a subtle, commanding nod to the hotel security chief standing by the entrance. The heavy oak doors at the main entrance and the service elevators fly open simultaneously. They are not caterers or late-arriving guests. Over a dozen federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with the letters FBI emblazoned in bright yellow across their backs storm into the grand ballroom. They move with rapid tactical precision, instantly securing every single exit and locking down the perimeter. The lead federal agent marches directly past the fleeing tech billionaires. He does not hesitate. He walks straight up to my father, who is staring blankly at the approaching authorities, as if trapped in a nightmare. The agent flashes a federal warrant badge and loudly informs Harrison that he is under immediate arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit corporate embezzlement. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting securely around Harrison U.S. wrists echoes loudly across the room. The financial slaughter is absolute, final, and perfectly executed. The cold, heavy steel of the federal handcuffs clicks definitively around the wrists of Harrison. It is the loudest and most satisfying sound in the grand ballroom. The arrogant, untouchable chief financial officer is violently reduced to a common white-collar criminal in front of the exact high society he spent his entire life desperately trying to impress. Two federal agents flank him, their grips firm and unforgiving on his tailored cashmere tuxedo jacket. They do not afford him the luxury of a quiet, discreet exit through the service elevators. They march him directly down the center of the polished marble floor. The sea of tech billionaires, real estate magnates, and elite socialites actively recoils as he passes. They pull their silk gowns and expensive suits away from him as if his catastrophic financial failure is highly contagious. Harrison keeps his head bowed, his face flushed with a toxic mixture of absolute humiliation and raw terror. He knows that his corporate reign is permanently over. He is walking straight into a concrete federal holding cell. Sydney is left kneeling on the floor, surrounded by the crushed white orchids of her ruined billionaire wedding. Her flawless philanthropic facade has completely melted away, leaving behind a frantic, cornered thief. She watches Preston disappear through the golden double doors, taking his billion-dollar tech empire and her entire future with him. But her nightmare is only just beginning. A female federal agent steps forward and towers over my sister. The agent reads Sydney her Miranda rights in a loud, clear voice that echoes across the emptying ballroom. She informs Sydney that she is officially a primary target in a massive federal investigation for charity embezzlement and interstate wire fraud. Sydney lets out a visceral, guttural scream. It is not a delicate theatrical cry for sympathy. It is the ugly, raw shriek of a narcissist who has just been violently stripped of her elite armor. She thrashes wildly, demanding to call her lawyers, screaming that she is a victim of a massive misunderstanding. The agents simply ignore her hysterics. They confiscate her designer purse, secure her electronics as immediate federal evidence, and escort her out of the ballroom right behind our father. The golden child is officially broken. 72 hours pass. The financial execution I orchestrated triggers a catastrophic, unstoppable shockwave across the corporate landscape. The morning business news networks run non-stop, continuous coverage of the massive fraud scandal at Pinnacle Real Estate. The corporate board immediately terminates Harrison and completely severs all ties with his toxic administration. Without the billionaire tech merger to artificially inflate their assets, the fragile house of cards Harrison built instantly collapses. The banks do not wait for a formal trial. They move with absolute ruthless speed. They trigger the default clauses on the highly leveraged fraudulent commercial loans. The foreclosure notices are immediately pinned to the heavy oak front doors of the massive suburban mansion. Barbara is left entirely alone in a rapidly emptying, freezing house. The federal authorities have systematically frozen every single offshore account, domestic trust, and shared asset. Her platinum credit cards are declined at the grocery store. Her luxury vehicles are actively being repossessed from the snow-covered driveway. She desperately tries to call her elite country club friends, seeking a temporary loan or a place to stay. Every single one of those wealthy, status-obsessed women immediately blocks her number. They treat her like a total pariah. Barbara is completely isolated, stripped of her wealth, her husband, and her precious social standing. She is finally experiencing the exact same freezing, terrifying abandonment she forced upon me 15 years ago. I am sitting behind my massive desk in my Manhattan penthouse office. The morning sun streams through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, bathing the sleek modern room in bright, warm light. My secure office line begins to ring. My executive assistant alerts me that a highly distressed woman is calling from a prepaid, untraceable phone demanding to speak with the senior investigator. I already know exactly who it is. I press the button to connect the call. Barbara does not start with an apology. She starts with a pathetic, frantic sob. Her voice is raw, shaking with sheer, unadulterated panic. She abandons all of her upper-class pride and begs me for financial salvation. She cries that Harrison is currently sitting in a federal detention center because they cannot afford the massive cash bail the judge demanded. She wails that the bank has officially seized the mansion and the eviction team is actively forcing her to pack her bags. She begs me to use my immense Wall Street wealth to pay off the toxic mortgages. She pleads with me to hire elite defense attorneys to save her husband and her golden child from federal prison. She tries to invoke the concept of family loyalty, weeping that a daughter cannot possibly let her own mother become completely homeless. I lean back in my plush, leather executive chair. I look out over the magnificent, sprawling skyline of New York City. I do not feel a single ounce of pity, anger, or sadness. I feel absolute profound peace. I let her sob into the phone for 10 long seconds. I want her to hear the sheer, impenetrable silence of my refusal. I speak into the receiver with a voice that is calm, steady, and entirely free of her toxic gravity. I tell her that karma does not come with a financial bailout package, mother. I tell her to enjoy her storm. I press the red button on my console, permanently disconnecting the call. I do not block the number. I simply instruct my assistant to permanently route all future communications from Chicago directly to the legal department. I pick up my custom ceramic mug and take a slow, satisfying sip of my hot black coffee. The bitter, rich taste is absolutely perfect. I look down at the continuous glucose monitor securely attached to my arm, confirming my perfect, stable health. I am not the sick, discarded teenager freezing in the snow anymore. I am the architect of my own flawless empire. I turn my attention back to the glowing monitors on my desk, ready to hunt down my next corporate target. I am completely untouchable, utterly radiant, and finally absolutely free. The most profound lesson to be drawn from this story is that your absolute worth is never defined by the people who fail to see it, even if those people are your own blood. When Paige was thrown out into a lethal blizzard, stripped of her life-saving medication and her family's protection, she was forced to confront a brutal reality. Biological ties do not guarantee love, loyalty, or basic human decency. However, her journey from a freezing, discarded teenager to a ruthless, untouchable corporate auditor proves that the most devastating betrayals can serve as the exact catalyst for our greatest transformations. The ultimate revenge is never about screaming matches, tearful confrontations, or begging for an apology from people incapable of remorse. True absolute power lies in radical detachment and relentless self-improvement. By taking the trauma inflicted upon her and weaponizing it into a brilliant, impenetrable career, Paige turned her deepest vulnerability into her absolute greatest armor. She did not let the toxic manufactured narrative of her parents dictate her future. Instead, she learned to manage her illness, her career, and her emotions with the exact same surgical precision. This story teaches us that we do not have to remain prisoners in the glass cages built by narcissistic or abusive families. You have the unconditional right to cut the ties that poison you. Walking away is not a sign of defeat, it is the ultimate declaration of self-respect. When you stop fighting for a seat at a table where you are continuously starved, you free yourself to build an entire empire of your own. Justice is not always handed down by fate. Sometimes you have to engineer it yourself by becoming so undeniably successful that your abusers are forced to watch you thrive from the ruins of their own making. If you have ever had to sever toxic family ties to protect your peace and build your own empire, share your journey in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button for more stories of ultimate survival and sweet justice.